What if your neighbor, someone you've known for years, suddenly accused you of being racist without any evidence? Imagine how that would feel. You've lived in your community, you've been polite, you've helped when needed, and you've never given anyone a reason to doubt your character. But then, one day, out of nowhere, someone points a finger at you and says you're something you know you're not. And not just anyone, your neighbor, someone who has witnessed your actions and knows you on a personal level. How do you even begin to respond? What do you say when accusations are thrown at you that could ruin your reputation, relationships, and peace of mind? Could you stay calm, or would you feel the urge to defend yourself, to prove that you're not what they claim? This is exactly what we're diving into today, and trust me, it's more common than you think. You'll want to stick around to find out how to navigate these accusations and keep your integrity intact. Let's be real for a moment. Accusations of racism, whether they're true or not, are some of the most painful and complex situations you could ever find yourself in, right? It's one thing when you hear about it happening to someone else, but what if it happens to you? What if someone you trust, someone who's part of your everyday life, accuses you of something so damaging, so serious, without even having real proof? It's like a punch to the gut, isn't it? And the worst part? Once the accusation is made, it can be incredibly hard to undo the damage, even if you're innocent. But why does this happen? What causes these kinds of misunderstandings? How can something like this spiral out of control? There's so much more beneath the surface, and understanding these complexities isn't just important, it's necessary if you ever want to navigate these tricky waters and protect your reputation. How do you respond? What do you say when you're caught off guard by something that feels so unfair? Today, we'll break this all down and figure out how to handle these accusations, and more importantly, how to rebuild what may have been shattered. Let's dive into the heart of the issue, because, if we're being honest, this is where the pain starts to hit. Imagine waking up to the news that your neighbor, someone you've known for years, someone you've shared countless greetings with, now believes you're a racist. And not just a little misunderstanding, no, they're telling everyone, spreading the word, and suddenly, you're seen through a completely different lens. Your name is now linked to something vile and untrue. But what do you do? How do you even begin to process that? More importantly, how do you clear your name when the accusation is so powerful and so loaded? There's no denying the gravity of it. These types of accusations don't just sting, they can shatter relationships, cause deep rifts, and leave lasting scars that can impact your reputation, your mental health, and even your community standing. It's like standing on a cliff edge, staring at a drop you never saw coming, and having no idea what to do next. The reality is, dealing with accusations of racism is never simple. It's easy to say, just explain yourself. Set the record straight. But it's rarely that straightforward, is it? Because, more often than not, when people are accused of something as serious as racism, the assumption is that the person who made the accusation must be right. And let's be honest, how many times have we seen situations where the person accused is automatically put on the defensive, whether they're guilty or not? They say something like, "I didn't mean it that way," and suddenly, their words, their actions, everything about them is under scrutiny, while the accuser remains in the moral high ground. It's as if the very idea of being accused of racism has the power to completely overshadow any other explanation, logic, or evidence to the contrary. It feels like you're fighting an uphill battle with an invisible force working against you. But that's not even the worst part. What about the tension? The awkwardness? The cold stares from neighbors, the gossip behind closed doors, the looks that speak volumes, even when no words are exchanged? How do you live your life when you feel like you're constantly being watched, judged, and misunderstood? You might even question your own actions, asking yourself, did I say something wrong? Was I unaware of how my behavior came across? It's a roller coaster of doubt and frustration. And then comes the social media storm, the whispers behind your back, and maybe even people you once called friends turning their backs on you. It feels like the walls are closing in, doesn't it? It's overwhelming, and before you know it, you're not just fighting one accusation, but the fallout of it, a fallout that may haunt you for years to come. But here's the thing, accusations of racism can be complicated. They don't always come from a place of malice or intentional harm. Sometimes, they stem from misunderstanding or miscommunication. And sometimes, they're just plain wrong. Think about it, how often have you seen someone misinterpret something you said or did? We've all been in situations where our words or actions weren't meant to hurt anyone, but somehow, they got twisted, misheard, or misrepresented. The problem with racism accusations is that they carry so much weight, and once they're out in the open, it's almost impossible to just take them back. It's like trying to unring a bell that's already been rung. The sound lingers, echoing in ways you never expected. It's even worse when the accusations seem to come out of nowhere. You thought everything was fine with your neighbor. You waved at them every morning, exchanged pleasantries, maybe even helped them with their groceries. And then, suddenly, you're hearing that you've done something racist? But you don't remember saying anything that could be taken that way. You don't remember ever doing anything that could even remotely be considered offensive. And that's the kicker, when you've genuinely done nothing wrong, yet the accusation still lands on you like a bomb, leaving a crater of uncertainty and confusion in its wake. How do you defend yourself when it feels like you're walking through a fog, unable to even see the full picture? The challenges you face are monumental. First, there's the immediate emotional toll, feeling betrayed, hurt, and powerless to explain yourself. Second, there's the damage to your reputation. People believe what they hear, and if your neighbor or someone in your community starts telling people that you're racist, suddenly your actions and intentions are constantly questioned, even by those who know you. Third, you're left with a dilemma. How do you approach the person who accused you? Do you stay silent, hoping it will blow over? Or do you confront them, risking even more tension? And what if the person making the accusation truly believes they're in the right? Now, you're dealing with someone who's not only accusing you but also standing firm in their belief, making it even harder to untangle the mess. Another problem is navigating how others perceive you. Even if you've done nothing wrong, your neighbors, friends, or even coworkers might start looking at you differently. It's not just about defending yourself, it's about trying to rebuild the trust you've lost with people who might now question your character. Isn't that the hardest part? The social consequences can feel unbearable. Relationships that were once strong may become strained, and you may find yourself in situations where you're always wondering, do they think I'm racist, too? Are they judging me because of what they've heard? It can be isolating, and sometimes, it feels like you're walking on eggshells, unsure of who you can trust. And then, we can't forget about the role of context. The way you may have said something or the tone you used can be perceived differently by different people, especially when cultural differences, personal experiences, or pre-existing biases come into play. What one person sees as a harmless joke, another might interpret as an offensive comment. So what happens when an innocent comment is taken out of context and suddenly, it's twisted into something entirely different? How do you explain that? How do you make someone understand that your words, your actions, weren't meant to hurt? When the lines between intent and perception blur, it becomes even harder to set things straight. There's also the broader issue of how society views racism. We live in a time where racism is a highly charged topic, and rightly so. But that means there's an increased sensitivity to anything that even remotely resembles racist behavior. And sometimes, that sensitivity can lead to overreactions. Is it possible for someone to overreact to a situation that they perceive as racist, even if the person being accused wasn't intending to hurt anyone? Absolutely. But how do you navigate this delicate balance without making things worse? It's a tightrope, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The wrong move could mean further alienation or even a long-lasting reputation as someone who perpetuates racism. At the end of the day, the challenge is clear. How do you handle an accusation that feels unfair, but is still loaded with so much societal weight? How do you walk the fine line between defending yourself, acknowledging the other person's feelings, and working to heal the relationship? Now, let's dig a little deeper, because this is where things get really tricky. The truth is, accusations of racism, whether intentional or not, are far from simple. And it's one thing to face them from a stranger, but it's a whole different ballgame when it's coming from someone you've known and trusted. So let's explore this from a few angles, because navigating this storm isn't just about defending yourself, it's about figuring out how to piece your life back together when everything feels like it's falling apart. First, picture this: you're at home, minding your business, and one morning, you hear from a friend, or worse, from someone you hardly know, that your neighbor thinks you've said something offensive. Maybe you didn't mean it the way it came out, maybe you made an offhand comment that seemed harmless in the moment, but now it's spiraled into something huge. A moment of discomfort has suddenly become a full-blown accusation, and now you're wondering, how did we even get here? Isn't that the hardest part? When you genuinely don't understand how a situation got twisted in the first place. You're not just confused, you're hurt. You can't believe that something so small could snowball into something so damaging. You feel like your whole character is under attack. Maybe you've been known as a good person, someone who always tried to be kind, open, and respectful toward others. So, how could anyone think that you'd be capable of something so vile? It's as if your entire reputation is being reduced to a single misstep, and you're left fighting not just the accusation, but the unfairness of it all. But here's the thing that often gets lost in the middle of this emotional whirlwind: racism is deeply complicated. The way people perceive things, their history, their own experiences, all of it plays a huge role in how they interpret actions, words, and behavior. What you might see as a harmless joke, someone else might see as hurtful, offensive, or even damaging. And sometimes, those interpretations aren't made on purpose, but are deeply ingrained in their perception of the world. When we're talking about racism, it's not just about right or wrong, it's about the layers of pain, history, and emotion that people carry with them. Think about it: if someone has been the victim of racism before, even if it wasn't directed at them specifically, they might react differently to certain words or actions than someone who's never experienced it. What does this mean for you? It means that even if you never intended to hurt anyone, even if your actions were motivated by kindness or a desire for humor, those same actions can be interpreted as offensive. And that can feel like a gut punch, because you're left asking yourself, was I wrong? It's also critical to understand that this isn't a case of a single misstep, it's often a series of micro-interactions that build up. That one offhand comment you made during a casual conversation might not seem like a big deal to you, but to someone else, it could be a trigger. And triggers are powerful. They stir up memories of past experiences, they make old wounds feel fresh, and they cause people to react in ways they might not even be able to explain. The truth is, racism doesn't just show up in big, obvious forms, it's often the little things that go unnoticed until they build up into something much bigger. These seemingly small actions can sometimes be like a slow drip of water, wearing away at the trust and goodwill that have built up over time. And then, there's the challenge of context. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely misunderstood? Maybe it was a comment you made in passing that was taken completely out of context. You know, the kind of comment that you know was just meant to lighten the mood, but someone else heard it differently? That's exactly what can happen when accusations of racism arise. You could have made a statement that, on the surface, seems harmless, but in the context of someone else's life, it hits a nerve. And suddenly, there you are, left wondering how you went from a simple conversation to being accused of racism. It's maddening, right? And what's even worse, you have to try to explain yourself to someone who's already made up their mind. How do you even begin to unpack all of that? This is when it becomes about more than just an individual misunderstanding, it's about systemic perceptions and biases. Think about how media, social structures, and even education have shaped how we view race. The idea of racism isn't just something that exists between individuals, it's something that's embedded in culture, in history, and in societal norms. So, when an accusation lands, it's not just a reflection of a person's intent, it's a reflection of the broader environment in which we all operate. And that's why people are so quick to jump to conclusions when it comes to accusations of racism. Society has built this heightened sensitivity around racial issues, which is, of course, important for growth and progress. But the flip side is that it can sometimes create an atmosphere where people are hyper-aware of potential offenses, even when no harm was meant. And here's where things really start to get personal. What do you do when you've been accused, but you know in your heart that you didn't mean any harm? You're stuck in this limbo of wanting to defend yourself, to prove that you're not the person being painted, but also knowing that doing so might make things worse. People don't always want to hear you explain yourself. They don't always want to hear your side of the story because once the accusation has been made, the damage is already done. It's as if your reputation is under a microscope, and the tiniest misstep can make everything spiral out of control. But here's the most gut-wrenching part. What happens when you confront the person who's made the accusation? Do you approach them calmly and try to talk things through? Do you defend yourself, hoping they'll see the truth? Or do you step back, giving them space, hoping they'll come to understand you in their own time? Either way, the power dynamic has shifted. The conversation is no longer about the original misunderstanding, it's about defending yourself against an accusation that feels so unfair, so undeserved, and yet so overwhelmingly difficult to fight against. And here's something else we don't talk enough about, the mental toll it takes on you. The anxiety. The self-doubt. The constant question of, am I doing enough to fix this? Am I doing the right thing? It's exhausting. You're not just navigating the logistics of a confrontation or a misunderstanding, you're dealing with the mental and emotional burden of trying to prove your own integrity in a world that's so quick to judge. It's draining. It's frustrating. And it's emotionally taxing in ways that people who've never been accused of something like this just can't understand. Now, we have to ask, how do you find your way out of this mess? How do you take steps forward when it feels like you're sinking deeper and deeper into a quicksand of miscommunication, hurt feelings, and misunderstandings? The road ahead is long, and there's no quick fix. But there's one thing we do know for sure, no matter how overwhelming it feels, you can find your way through it. The key is understanding, patience, and the willingness to engage in open, honest dialogue. It's not going to be easy, but nothing worth fighting forever is, right? Let's talk about something that feels really uncomfortable. What happens when someone accuses you of being racist without evidence? Imagine that for a second. What would you do if your neighbor, someone who you've always gotten along with, suddenly started spreading rumors about you, claiming you've said or done something offensive, but you have no idea what they're talking about? You feel blindsided, right? The very idea that someone who you've been friendly with for so long could think such a thing is a shock to your core. You didn't mean any harm, so how did this misunderstanding turn into a massive accusation? It's a complex situation. You've worked hard to build a good relationship with the people around you. You've always been respectful, kind, and considerate, so why is this happening? The worst part is that you feel completely powerless. When accusations like this get out into the community, it doesn't just affect you, it affects your reputation, your interactions, and your sense of trust in the people around you. It's like a slap in the face, and no matter how hard you try to explain yourself, the damage has already been done. People are already starting to look at you differently. They're already whispering, judging, making assumptions based on something that was never even real to begin with. You start questioning yourself, did I miss something? Was I wrong? And here's where the problem really starts to get sticky. It's so hard to prove you didn't do something when it's not a clear-cut situation. You're left trying to navigate an emotional minefield, trying to defend yourself in a way that doesn't escalate things even further. No matter how much you explain, there's always the risk that the other person won't believe you, or worse, won't even care to listen. It's not like you can just wave a magic wand and make everything okay. The tension is real, the mistrust is building, and it can feel like you're fighting an uphill battle for something you didn't even cause. At this point, you're left wondering, how do you rebuild trust when it feels like it's been shattered? How do you repair your reputation when it seems like no one's willing to give you the benefit of the doubt? It's a monumental challenge, and it's not one that can be solved quickly. Every move you make, every word you say seems like it's under scrutiny now. The pressure is overwhelming, and the weight of the situation can easily start to feel unbearable. What do you do when everything you've worked for is suddenly called into question over something you didn't even know was a problem? And then, bam! There comes a moment, something shifts. It could be a conversation, a realization, or even just a moment of clarity. You're standing there, perhaps in the middle of an argument or in the quiet aftermath of that accusation, when suddenly, everything begins to make sense. It's like a weight lifts off your shoulders, and in that split second, you realize the truth, that it wasn't you, and it wasn't even about you. And that moment of clarity is so powerful, so emotional, it's almost like everything just clicks into place. You can't help but feel a mix of relief and frustration because you finally understand where the misunderstanding came from, but it doesn't change the hurt that's already been caused. So, what was the truth? What happened? It wasn't some grand malicious act, it was a simple miscommunication, a difference in perspective that got blown out of proportion. And in that moment, you realize something else, too. The real culprit wasn't necessarily the accusation itself, but the lack of open, honest communication. You realize that if you had the chance to explain yourself, to clear the air before the rumors spread, things might have been different. But now, here you are, left to deal with the fallout, wishing you could turn back time and handle it all differently. And it's here, in this moment, that you feel the deepest emotional tug. You want to scream, to cry, maybe even to fight back, but there's something else there, too. You've learned something in the midst of all this chaos. You've learned how important it is to understand one another, to listen before assuming, and to offer grace in the face of confusion. But how do you get that message across now? How do you help others see that you never meant harm, and that the real issue was a failure of communication, not ill intent? This is where the key shift happens. It's no longer just about defending yourself. It's about understanding the bigger picture. It's about recognizing how easy it is for misunderstandings to snowball into something much bigger. And while you're still hurt, and frustrated, and angry, you realize that this moment is also an opportunity to bridge that gap, to mend what's been broken, and to grow in ways you never expected. But the path forward is tough. It's a journey of patience, communication, and, above all, the ability to say, "Hey, I get it now. I understand how this happened. Now, let's fix it together." So, here we are. You've been through it all, the shock of the accusation, the anger, the confusion, the hurt, and finally, that bittersweet moment of clarity. The truth has come to light, but now, what do you do with it? You fought to clear your name, yes. But there's something more important that's emerged from this whole experience, something deeper than just defending yourself. You've learned the power of communication, of listening before reacting, and of offering the benefit of the doubt. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real victory here. Because, let's be honest, misunderstandings like these don't just go away. They linger, and they leave behind emotional scars. Whether you're the one being accused or the one doing the accusing, there's a lot of pain and frustration wrapped up in these moments. It can feel like your world is falling apart. But if you pause and really think about it, that's when the magic happens. That's when you realize that what we really need, what we've all been craving, is empathy. It's the ability to put ourselves in each other's shoes, to truly listen and understand, instead of jumping to conclusions or allowing our assumptions to take over. But where does this leave you now? The truth? It's complicated. Relationships are complicated. But you've learned something valuable in all this mess. Maybe it's not about justifying your actions or proving you were right, it's about the space between the accusations and the answers, where understanding can blossom. It's about having the courage to look someone in the eye and say, "This is how I see it, and I want to hear how you see it, too." That's how healing happens. That's how we move forward. And here's the thing, every single person involved in this situation has their own version of events. And maybe, just maybe, those versions don't align perfectly. But that's okay. Because what matters now is that you're still standing. You still have the opportunity to rebuild the bridges that were burned. Sure, there will always be some awkwardness, some tension, but the important thing is this: you've learned how to approach these situations with more compassion and open-mindedness moving forward. You've realized that, no matter how tough it is, addressing these misunderstandings head-on, with understanding and respect, will always be the better path than letting bitterness and hurt fester. In the end, all of this, it's a lesson, isn't it? A lesson about resilience, empathy, and the importance of seeing the bigger picture. And that's how you move forward, not just for your own peace of mind, but for the betterment of the relationships around you.